The Legend of Zelda has always had a very unique relationship with horror. If you grew up in the early 2000s like me, you know how creepy these games could be, both in their art and in their game design. From the Re-Deads and Ocarina of Time to, pretty much the entirety of Majora's Mask, Zelda hasn't always shied away from dark themes and imagery. Nintendo wasn't afraid to make you feel depressed, unnerved, or downright scared. Every emotion was on the table for developers, and that allowed them to make some of the most richly experiential games of all time. It was never just about adventure and traveling to new places. Don't get me wrong, those things are another immutable part of the experience, but there was also a great deal of tragedy lurking in the background. Some truly horrible things happened to the people of this world, and the responsibility to fix it and to be the hero fell to you alone. Nintendo decided to go in a different direction with the series when it came to entries like Wind Waker and Skyward Sword, but many of us have really been wanting a return to some of the darker and more sinister tones of the Nintendo 64 era of Zelda. And with Tears of the Kingdom, we've gotten exactly that. Whereas the opening moments of Breath of the Wild were spent stepping out into the revelry of nature, we start Tears of the Kingdom in a dark, lifeless hole. The very atmosphere is long dead, unseen by Hylian eyes for centuries. In pursuit of knowledge, Zelda and Link find a corpse, locked in place by ancient technology. Then, the dead man awakens. The corpse destroys the Master Sword and afflicts Link with a lethal dose of the substance known as gloom. Link begins to decay, rotting away from the inside, and it seems as though his fate is inevitable. This intro makes a strong statement about this world. This may be a sequel, but this is not Breath of the Wild. Things have changed, and there's little time for revelry. I'm not saying that Tears of the Kingdom is going to make you tremble with fear. If you go into it expecting a horror game, you'll definitely be disappointed. The same as you would if you went into Majora's Mask today expecting a horror game. The point of horror in Zelda has always been to create contrast, and Tears of the Kingdom is most certainly a game of great contrasts. This is demonstrated in a very tangible way with the split map system. There are 3 main areas in the world map, each seeking to create a very different set of emotions. The first is the sky, which has been filled with the ruins of a lost civilization known as the Zonai. There's a kind of lost majesty here. The dregs of greatness continue to flicker and sputter, but the flame of ingenuity has long since died out, along with its people. Now, automatons wander the area, working ceaselessly to serve masters that no longer exist. And yet, in the midst of the robotic constructs and advanced machines, we can find that which has been so prevalent in the series for the last 20 years: nature. The game begins in what's known as the Garden of Time, and it's no less beautiful than Breath of the Wild ever was. Even here on an island, forgotten to time and floating thousands of feet above the ground, life has triumphed over industry, untouched by the plagues befalling the Hylians below. Below the Sky Islands is the surface, which serves as the midpoint of the world geographically, but also narratively. Life flourishes in Hyrule, but the events of Tears of the Kingdom have caused something to go wrong. The same event that exposed the grandeur of the Zonai civilization has also caused the world we were familiar with to begin to rot away. The gloom which has devastated Link's flesh is now spreading out across Hyrule, poisoning the very land upon which you walk. Anyone who comes into contact with the gloom is lucky to survive. While there may still be beauty around you, it feels as though it's on the brink of withering away. Life lacks the permanence that seems so obvious on the Sky Islands. Whatever artistry there may be in the hills and valleys of Hyrule now feels as though it's slipping through your fingers, no matter how hard you strain. The gloom issues forth from great, unimaginably dark chasms dotted across the surface of Hyrule, pocking the surface of the world like the holes burrowed by some filthy, scheming insect. The only way to reach the final part of the map, the depths, is to find one of these awful chasms, and to cast yourself into the abyss. When you leap, you expect to find solid ground beneath your feet, but it just never seems to arrive. The depths lie far, far below the surface, and are bathed in total darkness. In this labyrinthian system of caves, you're left with no point of reference, drowning in a vast sea of pitch black nothing. Sure, you can bring your own lights into the depths, but even that which shines brightest is transient, temporary. There's an overwhelming sense of isolation, knowing that there are hundreds of feet of rock between you and your nearest allies. But you aren't alone down here. The gloom is ever present in the depths, coating the entire expanse of caves like a thick mucus. Unholy creatures of every sort live in the depths, totally covered in the gloom. While there is life, it's of an entirely different sort than that which you might find on the surface. The flora and fauna of the depths have adapted to mitigate the effects of the darkness, but very few species remain. The majority of life in the depths has been choked out by the gloom. The darkness of the depths is so oppressive that Link's wounds cannot heal until he returns to the light of day. The damage you take in the depths destroys your heart containers themselves, so you can't just freeze time to slam back 13 bushels of apples mid-fight. It radically changes the way you must approach every single problem you come across. Every nick and scratch brings you closer to death, so even the monsters which seemed weak on the surface are now a serious threat. Much of your time in the depths is spent trying to avoid unnecessary conflict, hiding away when possible. When I first found myself scrambling through the abyss, I knew I wanted to make this video. It's such a bizarre experience, and it feels so unlike anything that's ever been in Zelda before. It's an incredible contrast with the other distinct parts of this game. The sky is light, airy, and wondrous. The surface is melancholic, with elements of both light and darkness. But the depths are nothing but dread. It really feels like it would be much more at home in something like Dark Souls. It's very reminiscent of the Catacombs or the Tomb of Giants. But the fact that it doesn't feel completely at home in the world of Hyrule is certainly an intentional choice. If you're familiar with the backrooms, you'll also recognize that the depths are a great example of liminal space. There may be miles and miles of undeveloped space beneath the surface, but it's totally unfit for human, Hylian existence. It's very alien, and it immediately pushes you out of your comfort zone. It's a painfully effective use of game design for the purposes of storytelling and world building. Let me be clear, I'm not trying to argue that Tears of the Kingdom is as outwardly creepy as Majora's Mask or Ocarina of Time. Those games have shifted the course of horror for my generation. Heck, the whole haunted game trope in creepypastas was helped along massively by Ben Drowned. I remember reading through it back when I was in middle school and being totally petrified by the story, music, and imagery associated with it. Ultimately, the reason why Ben Drowned worked so well was, well, it was actually somewhat competently written, unlike a lot of creepypastas, but also, it was based on Majora's Mask, which already had such an incredible, uncanny atmosphere. When you read stories written about other games, they always just feel kind of flat, unbelievable. With Majora's Mask, it already felt like something weird was going on in the background, so we were already more willing to accept that there was something off about it. And while I'm not arguing that the newest entry does horror as well as Majora's Mask, I am trying to argue that Tears of the Kingdom is committed to some of the same themes. While most of the other games feel like they take place a long time after a catastrophic event, Majora's Mask and Tears of the Kingdom are unique in that it feels like we're watching the world die in real time. In Tears of the Kingdom, the very essence of the world is rotting away, and Link himself is no exception, though you're trying desperately to fight it. Likewise, in Majora's Mask, we're actively watching the moon as it careens towards Hyrule to bring an abrupt end to all life. Both games have this cosmic, existential element that makes the whole conflict feel much bigger than you. It's not just Link versus the forces of Ganon. It's Link versus a seemingly inevitable and inconceivable force. That's not something we see in the other games. There's plenty more room for Nintendo to push the horror elements in Zelda, but Tears of the Kingdom has certainly been a step in a direction that I'm really happy to see again. What do you think? And if I may, I'd suggest that you check out my analysis of Kane Pixel's Backroom series if you're new to the channel. It's all about liminal spaces, horror, and philosophy. I've also got several new videos in the works, so consider subscribing if you'd like to see what's coming down the pipeline. I'm Curmudgeon. Thanks for watching.